Hi everybody, Golden Era Bookworm here. Today I'd like to look at one of the most historic covers on Your Physique magazine. Historic because you have here Val Njord, a female, in full color being presented on the front cover of a bodybuilding magazine. This has got to be the first full color magazine feature on a Weider magazine featuring a female. And it is very obvious that even by the late 1940s, this is October 1949, bodybuilding in general and health and fitness was starting to be promoted for women. So this is a very historic cover in itself. Now let's look at this awesome magazine with some very interesting articles. The first is an awesome feature. So here we have already articles on the fantastic Val Njord, again promoting fitness and advice. The most interesting article that I read from the first few was this, well actually it's not an article, but it's a great montage of Bob Del Monteque, I think his name is, again featuring aesthetic beauty in the male physique. Now the more interesting article that I was getting to was that of Armand Tanny. Armand Tanny was I guess a late 40s and early 50s bodybuilder from the silver era, and I believe that in this article, especially at the end, we find out about his routine and measurements, which I'd like to cover in a separate article, because Armand Tanny was very famous, especially in the early 50s, because he kind of sprouted in the late 40s. He only started being well known by the early 50s, and his achievements in strength and bodybuilding were very great. So I will do a separate video on him in particular. There's another great article on exercises for the lower back by David Willoughby, where he describes the strength feats of men of the past, and as exercises suggests good mornings, as shown here. This is a very interesting exercise, the weighted shoulder stand, where you basically, as you can see from the arrows, maybe I'll zoom that in. This is some really old school exercise, but you can see that it is indicated that you start with your head on the floor, facing up, shoulders down, and hips down. And as you with the barbell balancing on your feet, by the way, and as you raise the hips, actually you straighten the legs out. You kind of straighten them that way and push the bar overhead, which is excellent for the lower back. Of course, such an exercise would never be performed nowadays because it would probably be considered extremely dangerous. Another interesting exercise here, another old school one, is the toe touch, where you basically start with dumbbell down at your toe and you swing it all the way up, simultaneously touching your toes with the other arm. It's a very interesting exercise. Some real old school exercises are always shown in these 40s and 50s magazines. Now there are some other interesting articles as well, such as the Saxons, the Saxon brothers, as featured in a recent video of mine, where they describe their actual diet, where they had 24 eggs and 3 pounds of bacon amongst the three brothers. A very heavy breakfast indeed, and they were big eaters, especially after their strongman shows. I've already done a video on that. This is a great article, and also features what I believe is one of the most aesthetic bodybuilders of the time, George Boulanger. Now he wasn't a heavy man, it was very light boned, but you can see how aesthetic this man was. Now the article is actually called "How Best to Build Your Pressing Power," and it is an article written by George F. Jowett, and features some very interesting exercises described here, all kinds of pressing exercises to build the pressing power for the clean and jerk. So it's a really interesting article that I may cover in a separate video. What's interesting is actually how George F. Jowett, he breaks down the the ability to press. The ability to press basically depends on your leg and back muscles as to stabilize the body while pressing, whereas the actual press itself comes from strength in your arms, shoulders, upper back and lower back. So yeah, I may do a separate article on this altogether. Some really beautiful photos here of more silver era bodybuilders. Another excellent article to continue will be Alan Stephan's recommendations for beginners in the development of the shoulder muscles. So I will do a separate video on this, shoulder development for beginners, focusing on some of the more unusual, again, very unusual exercises are always suggested in the silver era. And I love doing separate videos on this because I like describing these very interesting articles. So you've got, for example, the use of the chest expander, which I featured in a recent video for developing the rear delts. You've got some very interesting forms of doing front raises and other interesting pressing movements. Again, I will feature this in a separate article from Alan Stephan. And that's basically it. I hope you've enjoyed this brief look at what I consider to be one of the most historic covers on Your Physique, showing a full color photo of Val Njord, and I guess the influence now of females in bodybuilding begins in the late 40s and early 50s, as now the opposite sex begins to have an interest in fitness and health, and therefore later on, especially in the 60s and 70s, females actually start entering the gym. That comes later on. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't to the Golden Era Bookworm. Leave me your comments, and thanks for watching. This is the Golden Era Bookworm. Bye for now.